ZCON is the first major conference of its kind, where only Gen Zers will take the stage.
Made for a diverse audience of forward-thinking leaders to learn directly from Gen Z about Gen Z.
Because instead of just talking about us, you need to be talking to us, connecting with us, building with us.
If you're looking for a marketing conference with the same old speakers and topics, then ZCON isn't for you. Just like Gen Z, this is a departure from the status quo. Over the course of 2 days at our Insights and Action-Packed conference, you'll hear directly from Gen Z on topics related to the creator economy, social impact, and the future of business.
This is a chance to flip the script, allowing young people to be the leaders, and for the first time, older generations to be the learners.
We've partnered with some of Gen Z's favorite brands to host ZCON, platforming their young leaders to take the stage.
Because if Gen Z works for you, buys from you, loves you, or hates you, ZCON is for you. So, are you ready to give us center stage?
Hope you all enjoyed your breakouts with Invisalign or Dove, or maybe you were with me and some of the other folks at Juve having some more intimate conversations. We're so excited to be here to lead this next panel. My name is Steph Strickland, as Olivia mentioned. I'm Juve's Senior Director of Research, and I'm here to lead this panel titled, It's Getting Hot in Here. And we're going to be talking about how the climate crisis has been disproportionately placed on the shoulders of young people. And with that, I want to welcome our panelists up to the stage because we have some really incredible folks that are going to be speaking to this. So if we could please give them a round of applause while they bring it on. In addition to these incredible 4 panelists up on the stage here, I also want to acknowledge some of the effort that went into creating the space to have this conversation. So the venue that we're sitting at is a certified B corporation and also LA's largest urban garden. We have a nonprofit partner, Everyday Action, that's working with us to make sure our food waste is sustainably disposed of. And everything that you see here was really intentionally constructed to mitigate as much waste as possible in the process. And so I feel really, really confident that we have the right people and the right place to have this really important conversation. And so with that, I want to pass it off to you guys to introduce yourselves to everyone here. Isaiah, if you want to kick us off.
Yeah, hi everyone. I am Isaiah. I'm a climate media creator on Queer Brown Vegan, but things I love to do is foraging for mushrooms and plants, not the psychedelics, but edible mushrooms. And yeah, I do a lot of just media work in climate, trying to produce, write, and host my own show. So thank you so much.
Yes, give it up for Isaiah.
Hi everyone, my name is Aditi Meyer and I am a visual storyteller who explores the intersections of style, sustainability, and social justice. So I've been in the sustainable fashion space for the last decade and my work has touched on everything from labor organizing in downtown LA with the garment worker community to consulting for brands on what a more sustainable future looks like, to photojournalism on topics of agriculture and artisans in India. So I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation. Thank you for having
being here.
Hi everyone, I'm Sage Lanier. I'm a climate activist and the founder of an organization called Sustainable and Just Future. Our primary focus is getting Gen Z the climate education we need to actually be equipped to not only survive, but adapt to and design a more resilient future in the face of climate change. And I do other things too, but that's what I'm here for.
Hi everyone, my name is Wawa Guerrero. I identify as an environmental justice scholar activist. And I've been in the climate movement since I was 15 years old. And I'm the founder and executive director of an organization called Black Girl Environmentalist, which is all about empowering and resourcing Gen Z, Black girls, Black women, and gender nonconforming folks.
They have many, many more accolades they were being very humble about, but all to say, we're so excited to have you all here. And to kick us off, I kind of want to call back to some of the work we do at Juve. Because Juve is focused on young people and staying curious about young people as a researcher, we're often asking questions about sustainability because we do believe this is one of the greatest threats to our generation and one of the biggest burdens we're currently bearing. And so with that, we've recently found that 70% of our respondents strongly agree that buying sustainably is important to them, but only a third felt that these sorts of products were accessible. And I'm curious to everyone on the panel, what is your reaction when you hear an accessibility gap like that?
Yeah, my experiences is like I used to work at a zero waste store, at a package-free shop, and one of the things I think our customers always get, especially younger people and college students, were like, how are you making these accessible when they're not? And I think, I quote Aja Barber, she does a lot of sustainable fashion focus, is like, a lot of us are so focused to products being so suppressed in supply chains to be so cheap, which is why we normalize the idea of like going to the like certain stores and being like, this should only be $2, or going to a fast fashion store and being like, this is $10. But the minute that we're saying, oh, this is $60 because it goes into supporting a young business, specifically those that are Black, Indigenous people of color, and this is how much it actually costs, like the true cost of these products, then you start to realize, oh, I'm paying for someone's living wage. And so, I understand like it shouldn't be the burden on that college student to be able to have the answers. But I do think that it's a lot of reframing in our own purchases and expresses, because there is purchases that I could have spent at least $20 more and it wouldn't have destroyed my wallet. But I thought, oh, well, that's just too much. I'll go for the cheaper option because it's accessible to me.
Yeah, to your point, Isaiah, I think when it comes to that accessibility gap, there are two fundamental truths. One is we do need shifts in our consumer behavior of what we understand to be a fair price. And we need larger structural conversations of why things are priced in a way where we've normalized such low wages for people within the supply chain. So from a structural perspective, I'm always saying the onus shouldn't just be on the individual to, expect to pay X amount more. We also need to look at artificial subsidizing of things like the plastics industry, which is tied to fossil fuels. So that's a whole different can of worms. But noting the people in this room, Gen Zs and people working within the content and social media landscape, I think one thing that sticks out to me about this generation is our generation is acutely aware of the importance of conscious consumerism, but we're also aware that we can't buy our way into a new reality. And I think what really exemplified this was the rise of the de-influencing movement that we saw earlier this year, where you had this basically like a viral hashtag on TikTok where people were, on one hand, de-influencing you to not buy a certain product, and then we saw two camps. People recommending one product over another, but the more interesting one was people talking about mindless consumption on the internet and how the internet has created a really unrealistic understanding of how much we should consume, how much we should purchase. And so I think that's really interesting because all of us are, engaging in this creator landscape of sustainability. And these conversations have always been a part of the space, like how we need to rewire our understanding of consumption. But now I'm seeing that spill into the mainstream, where it's going into the cultural zeitgeist of how much do we really need, and how much is our online landscape contributing to this mindset of constant consumption, and how do we break that and create a new type of influence? So I think that's really interesting to note.
Absolutely. Anyone else want to jump in and comment on that one? Sage?
I think the gap between people who feel like they want to consume sustainably versus not being able to find sustainable products is really interesting. I definitely have I think my hot take is Gen Z is just not as woke as we think we are. We are literally the Shein generation. And yeah, we are, and I think like what you were saying, we can't buy ourselves out of the ecological crisis. The ecological crisis is caused by consumerism. 45 to 60%, this is a study, so it's an estimate, of global greenhouse gas emissions are associated with the production of household goods. So it literally is, when you break it down, it is the fashion industry, it is the technology industry. Our consumption is what fuels the climate crisis. It's not like, no one's just burning fossil fuels for funsies, right? They're doing it because it's profitable. So what needs to happen is actually a degrowth of unsustainable industries. So I guess if you're struggling to find sustainable products or products that feel ethical or aligned with your values, the first thing is to buy less. We literally need to shrink these industries. Like, we have to buy less fashion. We have to produce less fashion. We already have enough clothes on the planet to clothe the next 6 generations. So there really isn't a need for sustainable fashion. It's fun sometimes, and I definitely buy a piece or two here or there, but secondhand is the best option. And then sustainable alternatives for the products that you do need. You know, you kind of do need like sunscreen and obviously like soap, right? So that's where I'm looking for the innovative new companies and wanting to see them build out their infrastructure and become more accessible, and see large retailers carry, you know, sustainable, ethical, fair trade soap brands. But when it comes to non-essentials, the best option is like none or just secondhand, right? So the future, we need to degrow the fashion industry and grow a secondhand fashion industry to meet that desire for like creativity while having an ethical, sustainable option.
Yeah. Yeah, some snaps for that. I have a couple of follow-ups on a couple of points that have been made here. I think you guys are calling out a very fair point about this sort of gap that we see between behavior and intention, and that being wider than we would like it to be. We, at Sage, put it aptly, we just think we're more woke than we actually are in some cases. And Aditi, I kind of want to call over to you on this question as somebody who works in sustainable fashion. You know, in studies that we've worked on, we've found that buying secondhand and engaging in circularity in that sort of sense is often the entry point for many young Gen Zers into the world of sustainability. It feels accessible. It's something kind of trendy right now. Does that feel true to you? And also, does that feel like enough?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And you're right. I think fashion is the entry point for so many young folks to understand sustainability as a mindset. So basically going beyond this idea of sustainability being something you can buy. Like, yes, you can buy more sustainability, but the movement itself can't be bought. That's a mindset.
Yep.
And so one thing I'm always trying to do with my own content and storytelling is driving home the idea of we're trying to challenge a culture of disposability. Not only of like how we view a t-shirt being disposable, but people on the supply chain, our understanding of a planet, and rewiring those framings. So to your point, yeah, secondhand fashion, people engaging in the secondhand economy are really critical, tangible ways to like help people understand what that looks like. But to your point of is it enough? I think it's a gateway. And I think fashion, and why I've been so drawn to fashion as my climate action medium, is that it allows us to engage in creativity as an act of joy and resistance to our larger systems. So what I've seen is people maybe enter the sustainable fashion movement because they love thrifting and going on this treasure hunt of like securing goods through that. But then they'll start thinking more critically about labor rights in this space. And now we have a whole corner of the internet that's dedicated to people trying to hold brands accountable to signing on to labor accords or engaging in degrowth policies. So I think the biggest thing for me is understanding that everyone has such an intimate personal relationship to sustainability and where they are on that journey, and we need to hold space for that. But if our generation could actually capitalize on art, beauty, joy as, you know, touch points for you to think about the climate crisis, I think that's really special. So we can't discount fashion because of that.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And I think what you're kind of getting at is this idea that there's a lot of different dimensions to a single element of taking climate action. And Wawa, I want to call over to you on this one, because intersectionality, it's a buzzword, but it's also kind of an important conversation to be had when we're talking about young people, especially diverse young people that are bearing the brunt of this of the climate change movement. And I'm curious how you, as the founder of Black Girl Environmentalist, have taken that and woven that into the work that you do.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Intersectionality has to be at the heart of the way that we think about and discuss the climate crisis and thus solve the climate crisis. So if we lean into kind of what you were talking about in regards to, you know, we're all here on a panel talking about how important it is for young people to have our voices heard. In regards to the climate crisis, I think it's also important for us to understand that it's not realistic to talk about it with a broad stroke approach, because the climate crisis impacts us all differently. We might all be weathering the same storm that is a climate crisis, but we aren't all in the same boat. So when we talk about extreme heat, if we look at our headlines, there are heat waves that are happening around the globe that are just breaking records, even here in the US. And that has everything to do with the climate crisis, but who is getting impacted the worst? So a lot of people don't know, but extreme heat is the #1 killer of Americans. That is a weather-related issue. However, that doesn't impact everyone the same. Race is the #1 indicator of one's proximity to a toxic waste plant in the United States. And why is that? Redlining. So when we think about redlining, redlining is this historic practice in which Black communities were preyed on for the development of new manufacturing facilities, highways, waste plants, whatever it might be, all of which were impervious surfaces that absorb heat, making them and the surrounding communities hotter. Now, researchers can now see that over 90 years after the first redlining maps were created, those very same communities that were previously redlined, that continue to be predominantly Black and brown, are actually hotter than neighboring communities that weren't redlined, at an average of 5 degrees hotter, with some communities being 13 to 15 degrees hotter, even here in Los Angeles. So these are the dimensions that we have to talk about. When we talk about the climate crisis, you have to talk about racial justice, economic justice, gender justice, disability justice. And to kind of lean into answering the question of how intersectionality is at the heart of what I do as a founder of Black Girl Environmentalist, Black women and girls are at the forefront of experiencing the climate crisis. Women around the world experience the brunt of the climate crisis because enforced gender inequality around the world makes us more susceptible to mounting environmental harms. As Black women, we're also experiencing the impacts of colonialism, imperialism, systemic racism, the patriarchy, a broken healthcare system, like the Black maternal health crisis. So our communities are experiencing the worst impacts of environmental hazards. However, we are simultaneously amongst the least represented in climate leadership. Oftentimes when you think about an environmentalist, it's not me that you think about, and there's a reason for that. In climate leadership, people of color do not make up more than 16% of representation in the green space. We are nearly 40% of the United States, and Black women have the lowest retention of any demographic. So we are trying to essentially create opportunities for Black girls and Black women and gender nonconforming folks to be resourced so that we can enter in the climate movement and ultimately stay.
Isaiah, I know that in your story, you've talked a lot on your platforms about how your upbringing and your identities have influenced a lot of the work that you do with Queer Brown Vegan. I'm wondering if you want to speak to that sort of experience at all.
Yeah, I think when it comes to just... Oh, no, oh, wait, yeah, it's working, sorry, my bad. I think when it comes to talking about the climate crisis, I think one of the ways that really inspired me is just looking into histories and ecologies. For a lot of people, we always hatch onto this American dream. And if you ask your parents, for any immigrants out there, children of immigrants, they usually say, we wanted a better life, we wanted the American dream. But the American dream was a lie. We all know only benefited white cis men and select few individuals in this society. But the reason behind that is that you dig deeper and they say, oh, well, we lost our lands, or we were displaced, or we lost it. Like the American dream would have not exist had neocolonialism and colonialism and imperialism not have displaced them forcibly. And so as someone that grew up here in LA in poverty, having to still, and yet my parents are still struggling, to survive, and their generational wealth is my existence, which is so sad because you think about it for a lot of immigrant children and a lot of people in these industries, they ask, well, who's taking care of your parents? It's like, well, I'm taking care of them. They don't have any retirement funds. And I think my frustrations of just being within the environmental sector is recognizing, how do we go deeper to actually tap into different movements that are happening? Because to me, immigration is one of those most important things. When we talk about how immigration relates to the climate crisis, we have to think about the border and surveillance industry that uses biometrics, AI, to hunt down migrants that are being forcefully displaced by the climate crisis, but other policies policies, and it's a lucrative business model. The ones who are funding the border and surveillance industry are State Street, Vanguard, and BlackRock, which are also fueling agriculture, which are exploiting migrant farm workers in our food supply chain, exploiting the fossil fuel workers that are predominantly black and brown people working in those oil rigs that are not being paid anything. And so my goal as like an educator in my lived experiences wasn't so much about, you know, wanting to be someone. It was just to actually understand and tap into like these dominant systems for all of us to start to challenge those narratives that we have and start to say, like, you know, was it really my parents' fault that they caused the climate crisis, or was it the select few billionaires that accumulated so much wealth that are now throwing the rhetoric around human supremacy when we know it's white supremacy that is unaliving all the humans and animals in these ecosystems than my immigrant parents that were just trying to live less than $20,000, $30,000 a year to raise a family of 3. That we are not the issue. It's literally the ones who have gotten this much power that have allowed these systems to exploit us.
And I think we've talked, you know, kind of backstage and previously about one of the most important tools to usurp these sort of systems or change them is education. And Sage, I want to go to you on this one. You've done incredible work in climate education. You have a program at UC Berkeley. Tell me about the gaps that you are working to fill and what gaps you see that need to be filled in climate education.
I'm going to try to be succinct. So, I think one of our biggest problems is that we don't understand the problems nor the solution. Gen Z is wildly undereducated about climate change. I mean, a lot of you don't know what plastic is made of or like where your food comes from. And that's not your fault. That's like that information is very violently being kept from us, from these institutions, because if we understood the problems, we would be solving them. So I think there's this huge, you know, we're always talking about climate anxiety. It's an interesting concept, but ultimately the reason so many people feel that way is because you're just being told about how bad the problem is. You have no idea what tools are available to us for moving forward. And that is pushing a lot of people into this, like, ignorance is bliss. I see a lot of people who used to be in movement space just kind of moving out because it does not feel like it's actionable. So my work is solutions focused and action oriented. The program I started at Berkeley was basically like a crash course, everything you need to know about the planet. We do food systems, we do urban planning, we do circular economy, cradle to cradle design, just like all of these different topics under the sun that kind of build together a vision for what a better world could look like, and then actionable steps for how we get there. And it blew up. It became like the largest student-led class that has ever been, and now we're a nonprofit expanding. I'm very passionate about getting Gen Z the climate education that we need to actually not feel hopeless and to be prepared to get into these movement spaces and get involved. Because I think a lot of people are good-hearted people, but actually have no idea what impact their jobs, their careers, their lifestyles actually have. Yeah. And I see that a lot, you know, I don't mean to like talk shit on the fashion industry, but I see that a lot with these kinds of folks. I mean, I was even just talking with an executive at Coca-Cola, and he was trying to convince me that they're the good guys. And I was like, you are literally the #1 plastic polluter in the world, boy. Like, what are you on? How do you not know that? But he was like, no, like everyone I work with is a nice person. And, you know, so maybe it's the education that's missing. I don't know if he hasn't seen the headlines or something. I don't know how we could get any louder, but I think that there are a lot of people who are good-hearted people in the, you know, inadvertently propping up a system that is based on exploitation and like resource extraction without realizing. And so if that feels like you, come on over.
Yeah.
And we can get bigger.
And I think to that point, we've actually done a study at Juve. We found that 70% of our Gen Z respondents in our 10,000 pool kind of sample called the receipt didn't know what Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3 meant. And those sorts of things are very important for understanding the dimensions of the issues that we're talking about. And so also I want to encourage anyone, send in any questions via Snapchat if you have them. But I want to end kind of on a more positive note. You were talking about solutions-oriented framing and making sure that we're very action-oriented. What gives you all hope to continue on in this movement? And what action can we all be taking, the people in this room, to make sure that we take the right step forward?
I want to lovingly push back on this question. I think it's a question that a lot of us climate folks are asked at the end of every panel. And once we tell our story of our hope, at the end, everyone comes up to us and they're like, "You're so inspirational. Your hope made me feel inspired." And they walk away with that and they're fulfilled. Hope is an active stance. Hope is a discipline. Hope is something that you earn. We got our hope because of the hard work that we put in every single day. And as young people, we are simultaneously under-resourced. If you look at philanthropy, climate is the least funded issue out of any issue. And then when you look at youth-funded things, it's 0.0001%. Justice-oriented youth, I don't need to go into the numbers, but if you want to garner your own hope, join us. Join a climate organization. Integrate climate within the work that you're doing, because the reality is that any job, any hobby in a climate future will have to be a climate job. So don't just find inspiration from us. Don't borrow our hope. Hope with us.
Good. Okay, she said that really well. I was just going to say a little bit of that. I don't want you to walk away being like, "Oh my God, that's so inspirational, someone else is handling it." It's not handled. Get on over here.
Yeah, for me, I think I come from a background of journalism and specifically solutions-oriented journalism. So a lot of the storytelling work that I've done is sitting at the feet of elders who, again, have been in these spaces, as there's so much vitality and energy in this room, but I think there's so much to be said about intergenerational movement building. And one thing that always gives me hope is thinking about how much has changed in what my grandmother has seen in her lifetime, for good or for worse, right? But I think that's what speaks to what can happen in a generation if we align our values and our vision for an alternative future. Yeah. So sit at the feet of your elders, engage in spaces of resistance, and that will feed you. But I love this idea of hope is something that is earned. So.
And Isaiah, you actually published an article on this recently about how our parents' generation is not to blame for the climate crisis, and kind of challenging this prevailing narrative that the people that came before us were standing idly by. And so I'd love to hear your perspective on that as you share your concluding thoughts.
Yeah, I'll do this really quick. I was talking to my team member today, and I said, I think we as a society are, exterminating our hearts to extinction by choosing isolation. And we were talking about the types of models that exist out there of how do we really express ourselves other than trying to keep ourselves, content. And we talked about this model called death cafes that are now rewired climate cafes, where it really brings individuals together to grieve what has been lost, what is to be lost, and who we are. Because I believe, as humans, as to live is to love, but it's also to suffer. And those are the things where I feel that for our generations, it's easily for us to just point fingers, but then recognize there are so many Black, Indigenous people of color that are continuously doing this work, and their work is barely being recognized now. And I think as a young person, I have to admit all the work that I do today is thanks to them. I would not be here on this stage without those who come before me. And developing those relationships to know that older people have so much wisdom to offer to us. They also have a lot of nice properties to stay at when you need to rest. But I'd say it's the blame of the generation thing is to really rewire that and say, yes, they were born in a time when certain policies were being pushed and allowed to exploit, but we also need to recognize our parents specifically probably weren't the ones that were pushing these policies. They were just trying to raise us as much as they could and love us as much as they could, even if it was half of glass of love that they can give you or 1/4 of cup. That's what you got, and that's what you give back to the world. So yeah.
Well, thank you all so much for all of your thoughts here today. Thank you for sending in questions. We came up close on time, but I really appreciate everyone's contributions here. Thank you all again. Stay tuned. We'll be having another panel right after this one, and we'll also be doing, as part of our day of action tomorrow, a beach cleanup so we can activate on some of the energy we've created here today. So thank you all again.